The man who dies rich dies disgraced. The words of industrialist and philanthropist Andrew Carnegie, born here in Dunfermline. By the end of his life, he'd given away all his £5 billion fortune, and our venue tonight is named in his honour. For one night only, we are playing Carnegie Hall. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to put your questions to the people in power, answering them on our panel this evening. From Scottish Labour, Deputy Leader MSP for Dumbarton, Dame Jackie Bailie. Party spokesperson for NHS Recovery, Health and Social Care and Drugs Policy, Jackie recently led Scottish Labour's Rutherglen by-election campaign. From the SNP MP for Glasgow Central and the party spokesperson for Home Affairs, Alison Thewlis. Alison unseated Anna Sarwar when she was first elected in Glasgow Central 8 years ago. Described as one of the party's best talents, she ran for the Westminster leadership, losing out to Stephen Flynn. From the Conservative Party, the Minister for Exports at the Department for Business and Trade, Lord Malcolm Offord. A former chairman of London Scottish Rugby, he was appointed as Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State to the Scotland Office 2 years ago. Born and educated in Greenock, Lord Offord spent 25 years working in the City of London, returning to Scotland a decade ago. Also with us tonight, the CEO of Carnegie UK, Sarah Davidson. Before that, she worked in the Scottish Government and was called one of the outstanding talents in the UK civil service. Sarah helped establish the Scottish Parliament back in 1999. And finally, award-winning broadcaster and journalist Lesley Riddoch. With a column in The National and a weekly podcast, Lesley is also the co-founder of Nordic Horizons, a think tank exploring what Scotland can learn from Scandinavia. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience. It's great to be with you, our first time here in Dunfermline. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you are in Scotland. BBC DN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. Give us a follow at BBC Debate Night as well. And our Debate Night podcast will be available to download straight after this broadcast. So, let's get started tonight in Dunfermline. Our first question of the night comes from Rebecca Hastings. Rebecca, evening.
Thank you. What does Labour's Rutherglen by-election win mean for UK politics?
Thank you, Rebecca. A swing of over 20% to Labour last week in the by-elections. Keir Starmer said yesterday at conference, success in Scotland can lead to a Labour government at Westminster. Alison Thewlis, how worried are you?
Well, I think there's a big difference between a by-election, in which time and resources and people can be poured into that, into one single seat, to a general election where 650 seats are up for grabs. That's a very, very different prospect. So we didn't win in that by-election. We accept that. It was a hard night for us. But we will be working very hard to make sure that we regain the trust of voters right across Scotland. We take nothing for granted in any election. And that's always been my approach to every election, to campaign as if I'm a vote behind. And we will continue to do that.
What did you learn from the result? You've got your conference coming up.
I learned that lots of people that I spoke to on the doorsteps, and I was out quite a lot in Rutherglen, lots of people were scunnered with politics altogether. Turnout was very low in that by-election, 37%. Lots of people had no great motivation to go out and vote, and as somebody that believes in democracy, that is a big problem for democracy, and I was quite sad to find that. And there was not enough, clearly, in that by-election, given the circumstances, given Margaret Ferrier and everything else that made that by-election particularly difficult for the SNP, that a good number of our voters didn't go out and vote. And there are many reasons for that, everything from somebody whose child was having a birthday party to people who were ill to the Tories' voter ID, making it difficult for people to go out and vote. But it was a difficult result for us, and we'll reflect upon that.
Jackie Bailie, what does this mean for UK politics? Fresh from conference.
Fresh from conference, I have to tell you, Scotland and Rutherglen and Hamilton West was very much the centre of the Labour Party conference, and a recognition that, a 20% swing is a seismic result, and I can only thank the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton West for putting their trust in Labour again. And it was a significant result because on the ground, I can tell you, on the doorsteps that I was on, people were sick of two governments that they perceived had failed them, whether it was the SNP for 16 years or the Tories for 13 years. They wanted a fresh start, they wanted a change, and they put their trust in Labour to be that change. Now, I have to say to you, I've always regarded Scotland as the first red wall, the first set of seats to fall. So it is undeniably very exciting that we've won this seat, but we will not be complacent about it. We will bring energy, we will bring humility, we'll bring hard work to our fight in the battle for more seats across the general election. And I have to say, the turnout was quite average for a by-election, so there was nothing terribly significant about that. But the one thing I did take from it is we were drawing votes from people who were unhappy across all the political parties, from the Tories, but also, and the Liberal Democrats, but also, interestingly, from the SNP. We, if you look at the figures, brought a percentage swing from SNP voters who wanted to vote for Labour, who wanted to vote for change because they were so disappointed with their own party.
And Malcolm Offord, the Conservative vote collapsed. Terrible night for you as well. The Conservatives lost their deposit with your voters, some of them at least tactically voting in this election.
Well, it was always going to be a two-horse race in Rutherglen. I mean, I think the Tories last had it in 1964. It was the year I was born. So I think it was always going to be between Labour and SNP. What I take from this is that the turnout was very low, 37% versus a 67% in the general election. The swing was actually more about the SNP voters not coming out to support the SNP. I think that what Alison's reflecting there is that the SNP base heartland is very, very disappointed with the SNP performance. What I think the opportunity is for the unionist parties, whoever they might be, in whatever seat they're in, whichever party is in the second place has got a really good chance, I think, of getting a good result in the next general election. And as far as the Tories are concerned, we're looking at our target seats very carefully.
Because the question wasn't specifically about this constituency, but about UK politics. What can you extrapolate from it?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, that swing's a 20% swing. That will not, you can't read that across from Rutherglen, I think, the whole United Kingdom. What I think you can read is obviously that in the by-elections it's a good time to vote against incumbent governments. That's certainly the case. We see that all the time. And so that's happened here again. But I don't read this across for a Labour victory in the UK. I certainly don't.
Right, Rebecca, you asked the question. What do you think this means, this result means for UK politics?
Well, I think it's inevitable that the Conservative Party are going to suffer great losses at the next election. So in terms of UK politics, we're really looking at where the balance of power is going to be in the opposition. So, you know, if the SNP can rebuild trust, there is a chance that they could be in a much better position. But at the same time, I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people.
Lesley, Riddoch, on the Sunday show at the weekend, Stephen Noon, the architect of the Yes campaign at the referendum, said that the age of the referendum is now over. And Scotland progresses when there's a Labour government at Westminster and a strong SNP government in Scotland. Do you agree with that?
Bits. Definitely. It's going to be very difficult for Labour, if they become the next government, to explain how they might actually get to the stage they're talking about devolution, but it means to English towns, which is fine. You know, everybody needs more power. But if they begin to tackle some of the really difficult problems that exist in England, like the complete lack of any power for the northern mayors who have got, you know, just power as individuals, but no structural power in their grasp. They might need to have a referendum on that, like they had back in John Prescott's days. Well, how do you get that you can actually roll out change like that, constitutional change? And hello, there's Scotland that's been voting a certain way, whether you agree with it or not. That's a mandate. If you can extrapolate from one by-election that you now have a mandate to say there's been a seismic shift in UK politics, what about the mandates that we've had for the last dear knows how long? Those things still exist. Now, I would agree with Stephen. I don't know if the day of the referendum is dead. And if it is, shame on all the unionist parties that have blocked it, because that is not playing ball democratically. And that could be another reason that people sat at home in the Rutherglen by-election, because they are scunnered that they've no way to move forward if, like me, they support independence.
Does it feel like something shifted, Lesley?
I don't know. I mean, I'll grant you that, yeah, obviously, I mean, that was a big night for Labour. It was a good candidate, and, you know, that's a specific win. But, you know, I'm looking at, for example, the statistics. There's only 4 occasions since 1918 when Scottish seats have made any difference to the outcome of a UK general election. General elections are won or lost on English votes because they're the largest constituency in these islands. So that won't change. That won't change until Scots decide they want all the control over this country all the time, not just for 5 years.
Let's hear from our audience. Man in the green top. Yeah, here you go.
When you say that people vote for independence when they vote for SNP, people vote for a strong Scottish voice at Westminster. They don't vote for independence. It's a different thing.
Jackie Bailie, when Anas Sarwar spoke to conference, he said that he was prepared to reach out to SNP voters. What does that mean?
So on the doorsteps of Rutherglen, what we were finding is people weren't interested in debating the Constitution. They weren't interested in that. Their immediate priorities were the cost of living, was how you make work pay and Labour's New Deal for working people, and the crisis within our NHS. All of those things we addressed. Now, I have to say, you know, voting anything other than Labour will not shift the Tories out of Downing Street. It just won't happen. And what people recognised in Rutherglen and Hamilton West is, for the first time in a long time, there was the prospect of a Labour government that would deliver on their priorities across the United Kingdom, and Scotland was very much central to that, central to delivering a Labour majority, not just for the whole of the United Kingdom, but actually to improve lives for people in Scotland. That's what people in Rutherglen were voting for. It wasn't a protest about independence. It was about the reality of their priorities in the here and now.
Well, let me test that on that man in the green top. Does that speak to you?
Yeah, I think, like I say, in general, people vote for a strong Scottish voice at Westminster. They don't vote. It's been proven over time that just because we have 57 Scottish National MPs in Westminster, we still never voted for independence. It's not the same thing. It's not why we vote SNP if you vote SNP, in my view.
Sarah Davidson, what does this result mean for UK politics?
So I think what I think is interesting in the Stephen Noon comments is that sense it opens up potentially a space for dialogue. And I absolutely agree. I think what people want to see are parties in government in different places coming together to see where there's common ground to try and tackle issues. And the big issues that are facing Scotland and the UK, and indeed all the other constituent parts of it at the moment, are the kind of complex issues that there needs to be collaboration around. So I think there's a really important point about where's the ground for dialogue. But I also have a lot of sympathy for the points that are made about trust in politics. And while it is the case that traditionally by-elections don't get a high turnout, this didn't feel like an ordinary by-election. And I think, again, as someone who works for an organisation that cares a lot about the democratic health of the country, 37% of people thinking that it was worth coming out to have a say in an election just doesn't really feel good enough. And I think all the parties in the UK need to really think about that and think about what it means for the way we do politics.
Man on the middle aisle here. Yes, on you go.
The real problem in Scotland is people never reiterated that in 1974, when the oil and gas was discovered in Scotland and our territorial waters, 30-year a Macron report was suppressed by the Tories and the Labour, and they obtained £300 billion in tax revenue. And if you want to fact check it, you will find out that we got less than 10% of that money returned to our country. And it was a national disgrace.
Malcolm Offord?
There's a piece of work being done on this that I recommend it's by a think tank called These Islands, and they've done an analysis of the revenues through the 70s, 80s, 90s, through to here. And there is no question that North Sea, in the 70s governments, the North Sea oil revenue helped support the UK government, no question about that. But if you look at over the period of 50 years, it's balanced out pretty equally. And there are times when we give support to the UK, and there's other times the UK gives support to us, and on balance, it's a balanced picture.
What?
How come then that you turned round, right, under Boris Johnson, your HS2 for London that was to go to Manchester, the full highway, Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland are paying 10% of it because you called it UK tax.
OK, you made your point. I think, Lesley, you wanted to come in.
You know, I think that's gobsmacking, quite apart from anything else. Margaret Thatcher used North Sea oil receipts to wreck our economy permanently. to privatise things like water that no other country in the world has privatised, that is almost impossible to get back now in England. Thank God the Scots had the wit not to go down that road. But I mean, that's a huge amount of the lost opportunity that we had, that Britain actually had at one point. Look at Norway, if we're going to get to that, sitting with its oil fund, investing it, living off the interest now, and a far healthier set of people. That's what we could have been if we hadn't had all that money squandered, and that's at your door.
Well, that fascinating, but that is history, and our question is actually about moving forward, where we go with UK politics. Lady in the blue top first there. Yes, on you go.
Exactly. We need to... What about what the SNP are doing with our tax money now? Surely that's more important.
Thank you. And lady with the green in front of you. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, I just feel that we've not had the benefit of that, of anything really at all. We're not really seeing our roads repaired. We're not seeing the infrastructure in our country. You're talking about, you know, Denmark or Sweden. And I think they invest in their infrastructure because of the revenues they bring in through oil. Why is our infrastructure so weak and dilapidated, you know?
Thank you. Your views on all of this at home, most welcome. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We've got a lot to get through this evening. So let's move on to our second question of the night, which comes from Malcolm Jack. Malcolm, evening.
Hi. Vivian Silver is an Israeli peace activist and has a strong record of trying to promote collaboration between Israelis and Palestinians. She was taken hostage on Saturday morning. In the shadow of the recent attacks in Israel and the subsequent military response in Gaza, how can we ensure that the voices of people like Vivian Silver and people on both sides are heard above those of hate and extremism?
Thank you, Malcolm. Vivian's a 74-year-old Canadian Israeli who spent her life campaigning for peace. She's believed to have been taken hostage by Hamas at the weekend. Lesley Riddoch.
I think people are just shocked and horrified every which way, actually looking at what's happening on both sides. Those of us who don't have a particular connection will just look with equal horror at the actual war crimes that have happened. First of all, in Israel, the Hamas attacks were a war crime against civilians. What's happening now, as we're sitting here tonight, the electricity has failed in Gaza, ventilators are failing in hospitals, hospitals are running out of electricity, people have no water, they're scuttering around like fish in a barrel, trying to decide where the next shells might land and where they might find safety. And this woman, Vivian, what an incredible character she is, and let's hope that's still the case. What is needed now is, right now, is to back the efforts to get humanitarian corridors so that vital supplies can come in. Egypt has agreed, so there's a possibility to come in through Rafah. But there has to be, perhaps it'll have to be behind the scenes, because politically, countries like the US particularly, that has clout within all those arenas, has got to look for its own political reasons, like it is 100% supporting Israel, and perhaps that's indeed true. Behind the scenes, there must be restraint urged. For Israel's sake, it looks very likely that Hezbollah is now threatening in from Lebanon. This could escalate easily into a theatre of war, which Israel will not benefit from either. I know at the moment no one's thinking about these kind of interest issues. They're furious, they're hurt, they're grieving, they're angry, and all those reactions are human reactions. But it's up to the world community to try and place a template upon that, which is to say, you can't have babies dying now in ventilators because you have cut off electricity in an area you have occupied illegally for 50 years.
Our question, I guess, is about peace and where peace comes into this escalating conflict. Malcolm, Offord.
Well, the fact that of the 1,000 massacred Israelis, a quarter of them were actually at a peace festival is really quite shocking and quite incomprehensible to figure out. You know, make no mistake about this from an Israeli point of view. The Israeli is a sovereign nation, recognised under the United Nations, born in 1948, and this is the worst. That day is the most number of Jews killed since the Holocaust. It's their 9/11 moment. I heard on the TV the ambassador saying that was 1,000 deaths. That would be the equivalent of 35,000 in the US or 7,000 in the UK. If that happened to us in our sovereign territory, in our own homes, where people were massacred in their own beds, in their own homes, what would our reaction be? We'd have to exercise self-defence. We have to root out the people who are trying to kill us, who are trying to exterminate us. So I can understand the Israeli reaction. What I think Lesley's highlighting is obviously now we've got a terrible disaster on both sides. The issue we've got is Hamas as a terrorist organisation is actually embedded inside Gaza. It's embedded inside civilian installations. So we do have to have humanitarian effort, no question about that. But let's just be very clear that from an Israeli point of view, this is their 9/11 moment.
Jackie Bailie.
I don't think anybody can watch the news and watch, you know, the innocent slaughter of civilians, men, women, indeed even children, by Hamas and not condemn them. What they're doing, frankly, is atrocious. But what we need to do is be very clear about our expectations now. Now, I have no doubt that what we're going to witness is retaliation from Israel. My concern, to be frank, is not with Hamas, but is actually with the innocent civilians that are staying in the Gaza Strip, who currently are suffering as a result of blockades that's stopping food, medicines, water, power getting in. So I would encourage anybody to follow international law. I think that's really important. But I hope the discussions that are taking place to actually get a safe route out of Gaza come to fruition, and come to fruition quickly, because there are lots of people in Gaza from this country and from others, and indeed the people who live in Gaza, that actually should be evacuated from there as a matter of urgency, and that needs to happen. We need to stop civilian deaths arising out of this. And I always believe in talking and discussion, and I think on that point Lesley's right. We need people round the table. We need the West and other countries to facilitate that dialogue, because having a war isn't going to solve anything. Having dialogue has the chance of us moving forward.
Alison Thewlis, the Israeli flag is flying above the EU in Brussels right now, projected onto Downing Street as well. Should it be flying above the Scottish Parliament?
I would have no problem with that. It's a decision for the Scottish Parliament corporate body, not for sort of individual politicians.
And they decided no.
And they decided no. And I don't have the reasons for that decision. That was a decision that was taken by that group of people together. But my heart absolutely goes out to everybody that is suffering this situation, to the people that have families in Israel who were affected by this. And there are, I understand, people from the UK who were killed in that attack. It's been announced as well. It's absolutely horrific, and people should feel safe to go about their business, whoever they are, wherever they are. And the actions of Hamas are just absolutely horrific in what they have done here. But I am also deeply concerned at the situation that we've now got ourselves into, where this has escalated so dramatically, so quickly, to the point where medical supplies are running out, where the electricity is going to be switched off, and where people are facing overhead aerial attacks by missiles in their homes, and they don't know where that's going to come from. In an area in Gaza where it's a very small, compact, tight population, 2.2 million people in a very small area of land, predominantly children in that area as well. And listening to some of the doctors on the radio when I was coming over here this evening, they are deeply worried at what they're seeing. They're seeing women, they're seeing children coming into their hospitals. They're not seeing combatants coming into hospital for treatment. They're seeing women and children suffering with horrific injuries. And it's those voices that need to be listened to just now. We need to have a humanitarian corridor to make sure that aid gets there so that those children are not suffering yet further as a result of this situation. Particularly listening to the doctors who say that their supplies are running out, that their generators are running out of diesel, and that those hospitals will not be able to cope if this continues very much longer. So we need to be appealing to the humanitarian aspects of this to try and de-escalate this conflict, not to build it up yet further, because there is no end in sight if that's what happens.
Thank you. Man with the white hat on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that anyone is surprised about what's going on. All of us knew for about 7 decades that this is a ticking bomb. Yeah. And also, I'm having my friend Asaf, he's actually as a reservist in EDF right now. And I could say from the conversation I had with him that everything, all the decisions are happening above their heads. It's all about the politicians in Knesset. It's about Benjamin Netanyahu, about the politics, which Israeli politics right now looks like politics in Poland in 1920s, 1930s. And they have nothing to decide, nothing to say. They're just like fighting with each other in a country. All those parties, there's plenty of them. And those it's not a surprise that Hamas, which controls Gaza, and Palestinian government doesn't have any control over the strip, just does whatever they like. And it's just, and it was like, we can talk and we can pretend that we just want to have a dialogue, we want to talk. We just keep talking that all the time. What's happening in Ukraine right now? What's happening on the Polish-Belarusian border? We can just pretend that we want to do something, but we don't do anything. It's all about the politicians, like, for example, about the elections. That doesn't want to change anything. The point is that Tories failed government and people being tired of SNPs being in charge for so many years, and sometimes actually trying to play with bits of I just lost a word.
It was going so well too.
Yes,
Put your hand back up if you wanted to come back to you.
Yeah.
Let me go to the lady in the blue first. On you go. On you go.
I've been out to Israel and I've got a friend who goes every year and works with the Israeli people, and they're wonderful people, absolutely beautiful. And if you think about it, the Palestinians actually voted Hamas in as a government. When Israel's bombed, they're warned before the bombs are dropped so the citizens can move. There is a corridor for them to leave by, and that, I think that is being bombed. I don't know why, but there are things going on that are not right. And as you're saying, it's actually the people higher up that are controlling it all, because how did all this happen in the first place? It's very peculiar.
Malcolm, you asked the question.
Yeah, just reflecting on what two people in the audience said, and plus the panel, I think the point is, I think Netanyahu's been in for 14 years overall, with bar 1 year, I think I've heard that. So I think you probably need to look at that as a sort of abject failure of his premiership, but also the kind of people he's got in his government. You know, that's why I mentioned Vivian Silver, because those peace activists are the people that really do get short shrift. They put in the hours, they work very hard, and in the end, sometimes they get taken hostage or even killed. When the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Britain or the European Commissioner is speaking to Israel, I think they have to hammer this home. But in the West, we've got a credibility issue, and we've really got to reflect on our own responses to this 70-year issue properly when we're engaging with Netanyahu's government.
Thank you. Sarah Davidson, we sit tonight in the home of Andrew Carnegie. There is a Carnegie Peace Endowment Fund to try and encourage and stimulate peace around the world where possible. Where does it sit where we are this evening in the Middle East?
So it's true. I mean, one of the lesser-known stories of Andrew Carnegie was that he tried very hard to stop the First World War. He crossed the Atlantic many times, trying to bring people together. And I think, you know, if he were here today, then a lot of the discussion about trying to bring people together for a dialogue for peace is where he would be, and I'm sure that's where the endowment would be as well. I think that. Isn't it amazing that people like Vivian Silver do go on in the most impossible of circumstances, apparently, to press for peace? And there are people like her in so many challenging situations around the world. And maybe in the horrific darkness of these days, if there's any source for light or optimism, it's that there are people like her and other people working for peace. And we have to hope that there always will be.
Thank you. We're in Dunfermline this evening with Debate Night. Next week, we're going to be in Edinburgh, and the week after that, we're going to be in Motherwell for the first time. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for either of those shows, you can just go to our website. The address is on your screen right now. Click on the link, fill in the form. It would be great to see you there. Let's go to our next question of the night, which comes this evening from Nora Black. Nora, good evening.
Hi.
Evening.
Good evening, panel. With less police in the streets, I mean, there are 600 less now in Scotland, and the admission from the police forces that they cannot investigate everything because of resources and time and everything else. What are we going to do? Because surely we're giving criminals an open invitation to do what they like, and even those caught are given a rap over the knuckles and told not to do it again, but there's no real punishment for criminals. So what we're going to do about the situation, because I don't see police on the streets, and I'm sure people are worried that they're not getting their crimes investigated. I know people who've had cars stolen and nothing's been done about it. People who have gone to, we don't even have a police station in Dunfermline that's actually open, and we're a city. We're a city. So that doesn't bode well, basically, for Scotland, does it?
So Police Scotland have cancelled plans to recruit another 200 new officers starting in January, training them then to save money. And the Scottish Police Federation says Scotland is facing a public safety crisis. Yeah. Is that how it feels to you?
It does. We talk about safety on the streets, particularly for women and girls, and yet here we are in a situation where there aren't even been crimes investigated. And I think, you know, every woman in Scotland, when they go out at night, of any age, they make sure they've got phones with them, they make sure they've got arrangements or company, and people know where they are. Just for that reason, we shouldn't be in that situation in a world in 2023.
Thanks, Nora. I want to hear from your experiences, real-life experiences in Dunfermline on this. You're a local. Sarah, what's been your experience here, and how concerned are you about what's happening with police numbers?
So I should say I can't fully claim to be local. I work here, but I don't live here, and I have to say I've a very good experience of working in Dunfermline. But I think pulling back from the immediate location and looking at it more generally, although this is a question about police, it's a reminder that lots of our public services are under pressure at the moment. You know, as no doubt those who are on the doors in Rutherglen and elsewhere will have been hearing, people are not always able to get the services that they want. And I often worry when we talk about that you can fall into a trap of almost fetishising the numbers. You know, how many police, how many this and how many that, and you know, that's a game that no one wins, because there's never going to be resources to keep ramping the numbers up. So I think the interesting question is, what is the outcome that we want for our communities? What do we want people to experience? Very much the way that the questioner was describing what it means to feel safe, and to start having a conversation about all the different components of that. There's, I was going to say there's a famous poem, but actually it's probably only famous to those of us who work in public policy. But the gist of the poem is, when you've got problems, do you put a fence at the top of a cliff to stop people falling off? Or do you put an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff to pick them up when they've fallen? And it's not subtle, you get the message. And I think it's an interesting question for policing and for community safety. Do we want a fence or do we want an ambulance? And how do you get the balance right between the two of them?
Justice Secretary Angela Constant says Scotland is still a safe place to live. Is that how it feels, man with the silver hair there? Yeah.
I think it's a politics. I seem to remember, an ex-First Minister standing up when she first took office, sort of saying, I'm going to recruit 1,000 extra police officers, which all sounded fine, but what she didn't take into account is the amount of police officers who are retired or who are injured or who are off work or whatever it is, and all the rest of it. It's going to take a very brave politician to stand up and sort of say, right, OK then, so we want to increase the numbers. Where do we get the money from? And it's like anything in politics. If you're prepared to pay for it, fine and dandy. That's a question and an answer that the taxpayer's got to pay, because it's the taxpayer who foots the bill at the end of the day. Here we are again. They're talking about taking 600 police officers in Tullyallen and putting them onto the beat over the Christmas New Year period. I seem to remember something about that last week. They're not experienced officers. So they're probably going to have to get mentored after on some
They'll
kind
have to be trained. It will take time, absolutely. Yeah.
So I've got a really good relationship with my local police, and I have to say I think the police across the board do a tremendous job, but they are doing it with shrinking resources. There's no doubt about that. Certainly it was the case in Rutherglen that there was a plan to close all the police stations there and move them completely out the constituency. So the issue for me is, do you know, if there are, the police estate is in a bad condition, we need to think about how we do policing in future. And for me, a lot of it is about visibility. Now, I know the police specialise. They are in dedicated teams doing particular jobs, but actually we get reassurance, as do, you know, the local shopkeepers on the main street get reassurance from seeing the police on the beat, visible in our communities, there to protect us as well. Now, I know that this is absolutely about money, but we cannot at the same time expect so much of our police if we're not prepared to fund it properly. There are all sorts of areas that I think you could get money from. Our ambition actually should be about growing the economy, growing the tax base, so that we have more money for public services, including the police.
But you're saying under Labour there would be more police officers on the streets and they would be officers on the beat.
What we would want to do is work with the police. I fundamentally believe in community policing. I think that provides reassurance, but it's visible, and I think people want that. But yes, what we would do is work with the police, work with local communities to ensure that communities feel safe and that it's adequately resolved.
Well, let's see if they do feel safe. Lady in the blue, the back.
Well, I think it's actually about looking at the criminal justice system as a whole. And I think that public confidence, particularly for women and girls, arises when you know that if you report a rape, for instance, it will be taken seriously and that it will be investigated as well as possible. But there's also sentencing policies that we have where, you know, if you're... there's a recent case recently where someone under 25 was put on community service for raping a person. So I think that sort of sentencing policy, when it's not clear about what the aims of that are, doesn't actually engender confidence for the public as well. So I think it's actually not just about seeing what the police are doing, it's about what then happens after you've had your investigation by the police.
Thank you. Some crimes down, I think, but rape up in Scotland, murder cases up as well. Lesley, Riddoch.
Well, I have been one of those statistics. I had a stone chucked through my window about a month ago. I tried to call 101 because it wasn't an emergency. I couldn't get through. I filed it online on the website. Actually, a police got back in touch with me, but I was busy, left a message. I tried to phone 101 away, couldn't get through. Hung on for 25 minutes. Got another call when I couldn't answer, and it's been ping-pong like this, backwards and forwards. So it's kind of frustrating. On the other hand, I've got to be honest, I don't know what I'm expecting them to do. There's no, you know, I don't have CCTV, there's no eyewitness. It's tough luck. I just think that's all that happened. I've got to deal with it. That's it. Actually, when you look at the overall statistics, there is the lowest crime rate in Scotland since 1974. Now, you know, generally speaking, I feel very safe. So I think couple of questions, though, that I would love to know a bit more about. I think people are worried about the number of hours that police are spending in hospitals and in courts, in accident and emergency particularly. And there's kind of a deployment issue that's, I think, could well be investigated. One of the other issues about this, I think, is just the degree to which the police are expected to cover all sorts of crimes that are not to do with being visible. The cybercrime. In fact, dealing with me requires somebody sitting inside answering a phone. So I'm not so sure in a lot of dispersed communities, you can't just keep walking around as the police. So I think, on the whole, I think they're doing a pretty good job. But absolutely, there's not enough resources. There just aren't, actually, for all public services. So, you know, that's an enduring problem that we would need a bigger conversation to fix.
There's a trial scheme at the moment in the northeast of Scotland, Lesley, where the police will not respond to crimes where there's no obvious victim. Very low-level crimes, in other words.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think I might have been one of them, actually, in that there's no CCTV and there's no witness. I think those are the two criteria that knocks you into they were not really going to... But, you know, to be fair, I think it was... There's a division between the different police efforts, which I don't quite understand, but I think the council basically answered on their behalf, and that's when the ping-pong began. OK. Young man in the front row here, yes.
Just on the lady's point at the back there, on the case that was recently, it was overturned, I think, as well, because of mistakes from the judge. Edinburgh University were asked to do the research into people under the age of 25 or what age it was. The research itself even says in it to not set a specific age, yet the Scottish Sentencing Council decided to set an age of 25. No, I think definitely that's something that needs changed. I don't think saying, oh, if you're under 25, then, especially when it comes to something like sexual assault or rape, that you're basically given community service and let off to do whatever you want. You know, you're still on the street. No, it needs changed.
Yeah. Let's go back over to here. Yes, when you go.
So I think that recently there's been a number of reports about problems within Police Scotland about it being institutionally sexist and racist. So perhaps it is time for them to take stock and fix things internally, look at their processes, see what they can do with the resources that they have. Definitely be great if we could have more police officers. But unfortunately, we live in a time where everyone, even businesses, are having to try and do more and more with less.
So we have a new Chief Constable, an opportunity for a complete review, do you think, and refresh of Police Scotland?
And I don't think that there's much point in hiring hundreds or thousands of people if there are fundamentally problems with the culture, motivation, morale and retention within an organisation.
Thank you. A gentleman with the glasses here as well. Yeah, on you go.
Yes. What we see is a lack of resources with the police, but we're also seeing whatever little resources they have are being put into actions that aren't necessary. It has been found that black and brown people in the UK are much more likely to be stopped and searched than white people. And this is found because of institutional racism. If our little resources are being putting into something that doesn't matter, that is based off a racist and prejudiced outview, then how can we trust that? Actual problems and actual crimes are being looked into when the review is based off prejudice?
And I think the new Chief Constable acknowledged some of these issues this week. We'd love to have her on the panel on debate night as well at some point. Alison Thewlis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the opportunity of a new Chief Constable, gives you the opportunity to look at the organisation, see what's working, see what needs to change, and listen to the way in which communities are feeling about policing. A new person coming in is always a good opportunity to take stock and to do that.
Do we need more bobbies on the beat, though?
Well, I think there's a couple of aspects to that. So because you need to have two police at all times walking around in the street, that's time that they are not solving crimes, that's time that they're not investigating or following up on complaints.
They could be stopping crimes by being there.
They could be, but if we have limited numbers and limited resources, as we do after more than a decade of austerity, you have to try and prioritise what is important there. And I know of some very good examples of community policing in my own constituency in Glasgow. I can't speak to Dunfermline, unfortunately, with as much experience, but where the police had got involved in youth antisocial behaviour, had found ways of diverting those kids away from the antisocial behaviour that they were perpetrating, of having a real positive impact in the community from that concentrated intervention, having people all the way around the table, from the schools to the social work to the housing, looking at the problem from that aspect. And when you've got really good community policing from that aspect, you can actually start to reduce the crime, you can actually start to concentrate on the more important things, rather than just chasing kids around areas and trying to lock them up, because that won't change their behaviour and it won't be effective in terms of the policing either. So if you've got really good community cops working away in the communities and making that happen, that really is worth its weight in gold in terms of making a difference.
A man on the back row.
Hi there. I've been a police officer for 3 decades now, so I've seen every government, every change you could possibly think of, and it's nice to hear you say that regarding community policing, because I do believe community policing is at the centre of everything. People want to see people walking about, and I get the idea that yes, you'll be walking about, and what are you achieving? Prevention is at the core of all policing. That takes it right back to the beginning, and our kind of core values was guard, watch, patrol. That's what we did. In terms of officer numbers, you could throw 2,000 police officers at Police Scotland. It's what you do with those officers. And I think the lady down there who said regarding a review, probably yes, have a look. How is the police using it? I'm well down the ladder. That's the policymakers up the top. But I think an independent review on the police, how they use the numbers, how they use the funding. I've seen changes in frontline officers the last 3 decades, but what I would like to say is that there's this thing about not being taken seriously for crimes of sexual assault. I could tell you 100% people are taken seriously. Everything is given a victim-centred approach. When it comes to sexual crime, everybody is taken seriously, everybody is listened to, and the people are out in the street that are actually doing the job, the officers that are out there, are 110% working at capacity. And yes, we'd all like more numbers, we'd like more resources, we'd like more money, but I think it all comes down to how do we use that money and where is it put, and are we using it in the best way?
Can I ask you as well, what's morale like?
Morale? Well, I'm quite happy, but because I've only got 30 years in. But it's a funny thing. When I joined the police in the 90s, you had different scopes of crime, different types of crime, and at that time, The officers who've been there for many years thought there was issues in the service. They thought they were disillusioned and unhappy. And that's continued throughout the time. And I don't know if that's like that in other organisations or private industry, but I think sometimes the vast majority of people I work with are in there, they want to do a good job, they want to help people. I think that's the major thing. But in terms of morale, it changes throughout time as people change. And I don't know if that's down to numbers, staffing and things like that. But to be honest, there's always been issues with staffing.
You think it's time for reform? You think it's time for a fundamental look at how it's organised?
I think if you look at it, because I've seen about the 200 officers that are not coming from Tully Island, which is fine, and obviously the argument about those who will be less experienced, which is fine as well. But as I say, I think you can throw as many officers as you want, but it's how do we use these officers and how do we get best value for the staff we have.
Thank you, thank you. Malcolm Offord.
It's very interesting listening to this because obviously I'm a Scot living in Scotland, but also a UK minister for the UK government, and this is actually devolution in action. What devolution is about is allowing the Scottish government to operate, make choices and make priority choices on behalf of the Scottish people in devolved areas. Police is devolved, education, health, transport, these are all devolved areas where the Scottish government is funded, and the Scottish government then has to make decisions. Now, I have to take issue, Alison, with the idea of a decade of austerity.
It's exactly what it's
because the numbers
exactly
don't back that up. The Scottish government in the last 7 years has had funding of 8% per annum growth, 8% per annum. Across the whole United Kingdom, it's been 6%. Scottish government's budget has grown at 8% per annum. That is a huge growth.
But there's complaints about not enough police numbers south of the border as well.
Hang on. The point here is that if you look at the priorities of the Scottish government, the biggest priorities have been in welfare and benefits and in public sector wage settlements. That's where the biggest money's gone, right? The three departments have had the least funding are the police, education and local authorities. Now, that is a matter for the Scottish government and the Scottish people to vote in or out, depending on what your priorities are. But the priorities clearly within the police have been at the lower end of the priority list, and that's what the Scottish government have decided to do with the money. If they had different priorities and want to spend more on education or more on policing, they can do that. The devolution settlement allows complete autonomy for the Scottish government to decide where they spend their money.
OK, let me hear from some more people in the audience. Man with the glasses to begin with. Yes, on you go.
Hi. I live in Dunfermline. I think it is quite a safe place, and even at night, but I realise that people have different perspectives and different targets and whatnot. But I think overall there's a bit of maybe a PR issue with the police where you almost assume, to your point, Margaret, that the police aren't going to attend some crimes. And sometimes it gets labelled as being the kind of the low-key stuff or the low-ball stuff, like shoplifting. But all that does is escalate, and don't think anyone would grudge, say, a parent stealing a loaf of bread from the shops to feed their kids during a cost of living crisis. But it's got to a point where everyone you speak to who works in retail talks about it. It's like a pandemic in retail where people are kind of taking things off the shelf, and it isn't just low-key, there's violence involved in it as well, and there's just that brazen attitude that they'll get away with it because they believe the police won't turn up. They believe that they could do it again and again with impunity.
And rising numbers of assaults and shop workers as well.
Yeah,
thank you for that point.
And it kind of escalates as well,
from
shoplifting to assault.
Your views on all of that. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media to debate with us on this. Let's squeeze in another question tonight, which comes from Alistair Milne. Alistair, good evening.
Good evening. The National Health Service is doing its best, but it's not fit for purpose. It's inefficient and it's failing its customers. Can the panel give us some insight as to what the future holds for Scottish healthcare, especially for the ageing population and the generations that are following behind us?
Alistair, why are you asking this question? Have you had some experience?
Not personally, but certainly within family and friends. My personal experience has been good. Family and friends has been mixed, and certainly I do experience phoning the doctor for an appointment. Typically, emergency departments are closing. So I think it's a fair question. It's not fit for purpose at the moment.
Jackie Bailie, Keir Starmer said yesterday to Labour conference that Labour would reform the NHS. What does that mean?
Well, firstly, I think we should recognise the staff who do a tremendous job in the NHS with, really tight resources. And we have waiting lists where 1 in 7 people in Scotland are either waiting for a diagnostic test or for treatment. And people are increasingly, raiding the family coffers to go private because they're in so much pain.
That's
and
the
can't
problem.
wait,
How do we
right?
fix it?
Well, I'm coming on to that because you need to define the problem first. We spend all our time looking at the acute sector, at hospital care, at secondary care, and we don't spend enough time thinking about primary care, our GPs, multidisciplinary teams round about them, actually helping sustain people, doing preventative health and helping sustain people in their communities.
People in this room will struggle to see their GPs.
I know, which is why we should be investing in it. So the Scottish Government have a target for increasing the number of GPs, which they simply will fail to meet. In fact, we've lost 200 whole-time equivalent GPs at the same time as the number of patients have risen. So each GP is on average dealing with 160 more people than they were a few years ago. They were promised multidisciplinary teams, visiting, so specialist nurses, mental health workers, allied health professionals. All of this was promised, but what happened was last year the government cut 65 million from the Primary Care Development Fund. We need to get primary care right, because if we don't get it right, people end up deconditioned at the front door of A&E or in out-of-hours services because they can't get appointments.
Jackie, hold that thought.
So
that,
we need to
man with the beard is shaking
that.
his head there.
I live in a constituency in West Fife where there are 3,500 people to one doctor. 3,500. Yeah?
You're making my point for me.
In a country, Scotland, with the highest taxes in the whole of the United Kingdom, tell me, how is that possible? In that constituency, they have just sold off the practice to a private bidder because the NHS cannot man it. In a country with the highest taxes in Britain.
OK.
Explain that.
Alison Thewlis, over to you.
First of all, I would dispute very much, and it's been fact-checked on this as well. We are not the highest tax part of Britain, but that said, there are significant challenges in terms of NHS recruitment, and a good deal of this is also related to Brexit, because the NHS is an international organisation in its staffing, and people who were serving in the NHS have left and gone back to Europe because they have been made to feel so unwelcome by Brexit. It also means that it's been a struggle to bring more people in to that. In addition to that, we have a Home Office regime that does not allow people to work. And I've had people at my constituency surgeries who are qualified medical professionals in their own countries who the Home Office is preventing from working. And that is deeply frustrating.
Labour's Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, says the NHS must modernise or die. Is he right?
Well, I'm not. Again, you didn't quite get from Jackie Bailie exactly what he means by modernising. It is always modernising. It is always modernised. That is the nature of the NHS. It has been a living, breathing thing.
But that man says
all
it's
this
failing
time.
people right now.
It has been under an extreme amount of pressure. We all know that. We've all had that experience through Brexit. It's been an additional burden on the NHS having to deal with that. We are moving out of that situation. That is true of healthcare systems right around the world, and the NHS is no different to that. But if you're saying that the NHS is failing, you're perhaps suggesting that it needs to be replaced with something else. And what is that? Is that a model where you have to pay private insurance, as other countries do? Is it a model where you have to pay even more taxation for that system? Because the NHS is an incredibly precious thing. Getting to go and get medical care at the point of need is a very special thing that we have here in Scotland, and we are lucky to have it. And we should try and protect that at all costs.
OK,
but it is under severe pressure.
Sarah Davidson.
We need to recognise that.
So, again, there's a risk in these conversations you end up talking about the sticking plasters rather than the longer-term challenge. And absolutely, I hear what other panellists have said about the pressures that have been on the NHS in recent years, but it's also the case that the system that was put in place that has served my parents well might serve me. I don't think it will serve my child well. And therefore, we really need to be thinking about what it is we need the NHS to do and what it is that we need to do about the burden of ill health in the country. And of course, that's a longer-term project. But the determinants of ill health are so well understood these days, and there are things that are not things that the NHS can do. It's to do with housing, it's to do with employment, it's to do with education. There's so many things that we need to understand the complexity of.
And an ageing population as well.
And an ageing population,
Come to you in just a second, sir. Lesley, Riddoch, what do you think?
And poverty. You know, this is one of the biggest issues that we've got, is the poverty that causes ill health, chronic ill health, that results in people needing all sorts of kind of medical intervention, that results in Scotland actually having one of the worst rates really now. Our longevity is creeping back the way now. And
Life expectancy is falling.
That's a nice way of putting it even. And the thing is that our healthy life expectancy is less. So, you know, this is all bad news, and it cannot be taken away from the poverty that many people are living in.
Okay.
Now, that's a big macro issue that you've got to deal with. The other thing I'd love to just get in is that Britain generally is contributing less towards its health service than any other country in Europe. Now, you can talk about it being fully devolved, but that clump of money that comes to Scotland is calculated on what Britain spends. Britain spends, you know, to just be a bit melodramatic about it, hee-haw on its public
Right, Malcolm
services
Offord,
and on health.
what would you say to that?
Okay. Well, what I'd say to that, again, as I said to Alison, is that the facts, the numbers don't bear that out. For the whole United Kingdom, we spend the thick end of 200 billion on health. Just to put that in context, our welfare budget, pensions and welfare is 300.
Is that more than other European countries?
Hang on. Our health is
It's one of the
200
worst pensions
and our education is 100. Now, the point of that is that's 18% of our total spend and 9% of our GDP. That compares to France and Germany. America spends 15% of GDP on health. Are the Americans healthier than we are? Question mark. So we spend a good figure of 9% of our GDP on health, and we are at record amounts of spend. And I think what everyone is saying now, the gentleman in the green top is saying, I feel that I'm paying the highest taxes of anywhere in the UK, and I don't feel I'm getting the services in return. And that, to me, is where we need to have reform in the NHS.
All right.
In order to get
we only have 30 seconds left. I want to come to this man down here on the second row. Yeah, on you go.
Selfishly bringing it back to Dunfermline for 30 seconds. We've got a local hospital here, the A&E. It'll be 11 years in January since the A&E shut at the Queen Margaret Hospital. Dunfermline's got the biggest rising population in Scotland at the moment. We've got new build houses, everything's shutting down, we don't have any A&E.
And you're a city.
Indeed.
Again, as well. I think we probably need to come back to Dunfermline and talk about this again, because we're out of town, I'm afraid, for this evening. Thank you very much indeed for being with us tonight. Next week, we're going to be in Edinburgh. The week after that, we're going to be in Motherwell. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience, as these people have, just go to the website. If you missed any of tonight's show, it's repeated later on BBC One Scotland, or you can watch any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our lovely audience here in Dunfermline. We will be back. And of course, to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week from Edinburgh. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well from all of us in Debate Night. Good night.